So welcome to this behind-the-scenes look at what went into the making of our feature Timeline. The first episode was about the Legend of Zelda, and we got a few guys here who were involved in the process in one way or another. I'm Michael Damiani. I showed up on the credits as the producer, but I think we all kind of worked equally as hard on this.
That's not true.
I don't know. Without these people here, I don't think this would have ever turned out as well as it did. So
I'm happy to take full credit.
I definitely worked on this harder than Marco, that's for sure.
So I'm gonna let these guys introduce themselves real quick so you know who the hell's talking here. So to my right, which you're not seeing right now, is Marco Rosado.
Hello.
To my left is Brandon Jones.
Hello, how are you?
And to my far left, by his little self, Miguel Lopez.
Hello. I'm just happy to be sitting next to Brandon Jones.
The protagonist of game trailers.
That's right.
And I guess maybe just what did you guys feel you did on this? I mean,
well, I think it'd be
what would be good to start with? I mean,
well, speaking as somebody who really didn't have a feeling for anything like the whole community surrounding the Zelda timeline, I think it'd be useful for you to kind of introduce the fact that there is one, right? Like there's this group of people out there who spent enormous amounts of energy trying to piece together all of these games, and out of that emerged a subculture that you, Mike Damiani, are a part of.
Yeah, you were part of it. I mean, you grew up with this stuff. Yeah. I mean, I kind of watched it from a distance, every time a new Zelda game came out and I saw a stained glass art and someone's like, oh, well, look at that. And then I look up, but once I read all the crazy stuff, I was like, okay, never mind.
Turned you off, huh?
Yeah, I really had no idea that this thing even existed. I just took for granted the fact that every Zelda game was just kind of essentially them retelling the myth. So yeah, I mean, tell us about what. I mean,
that's actually a perfectly understandable viewpoint. There, since the dawn of people caring about the storylines in The Legend of Zelda, there are people who've always interpreted it as it's essentially the same game same story being retold over and over again. And there's actually some credence to that because Shigeru Miyamoto, who's created a bunch of Nintendo series, a few times he's gone on record and said that some of his games he just envisioned them as retellings. I remember when the game Star Fox came out and then they made Star Fox 64 a few years ago. He basically said, oh, it's kind of like a retelling of Star Fox, it's like a re-envisioning of it. And we kind of do that every now and then with some of our series and stuff. So, people take what these guys say, the creators say, and put it on a pedestal as they call it canon. Or
and rightly so,
yeah,
because they are the creators.
But it goes both ways though. In the same time, whenever they say something that maybe they didn't intend to be super serious, just giving casual statements, people would grasp at that and set that as their commandment, etched in stone somewhere. When truth be told, you might not have known the context for that. People are going off these interviews for years that weren't even in English. Some poor guy was just paid to translate them for some Nintendo Power magazine or something. And probably the last thought in that person's head was, I want to make sure I got it the Zelda information accurately down instead of oh, I'm just getting paid to translate this so it makes sense in English or something. Right. That kind of scrutiny, I don't think anyone actively cared about that outside of the community.
Yeah, by community, you mean the timeline theorists?
Well, not purpose to timeline stuff. Yeah, timeline theorists would care about that, but things said broadly about the game, this game's going to be about this, not story-wise, the new gameplay mechanic. And one of the things that the Zelda creators or just Nintendo in general is notorious for is saying one thing ahead of time during the early development of a game. And then things would change around by the time the game was out, and people put so much stock in what they said early.
Right.
And then naturally things change over game development. Any game developer would tell you what they go out to plan to do at the beginning doesn't necessarily end up where they are by the time the game's completed. So people would be look into deeper meaning into that when there was no deeper meaning to be found.
Right,
so an example would be, they would say one game just related to story. They would say The Wind Waker is actually going to be a prequel to this game. And I was oh crap, let's start making ideas where's it going to be set, what are going to be the gameplay mechanics they're going to do, because this weapon can't be in the game because it wasn't made till later, stuff like that. And then a few months later or a year later, whenever they finally got around to new information, to be like, actually, it's kind of a sequel now. Like, they wouldn't even address that they'd said it. When people were like, wait, you said it was a prequel, they don't even remember that they said that before. Like, they've probably been asked that so many times, like, and they don't. Is this indicative that maybe they didn't like really think about that stuff so much?
How did timeline theorists respond? Like, how do they take these inconsistencies?
Well, I think Mike, like, remember like all those lunch meetings we've had, like, every time he'd say like Eiji Onuma, who is the director of most of the modern Zelda games, like you always said like he had like a story vision for the series, whereas Miyamoto was more detached from the development, and he usually just said like, yeah, like this is how I see it, and that conflict between what Miyamoto said and what Onuma was saying.
Right. Is there kind of any legitimacy to that conflict? Like, was that in fact a thing?
So yeah, so backstory for that is it's pretty well documented that Miyamoto makes games. He doesn't make stories. He's actually, there's one infamous quote, I don't know how accurate it is anymore. He actually at one point didn't believe his games were actually artwork. He that whole debate about where games are art and stuff. At one point he was apparently on the fence that, no, these are just games, they're entertainment. Like, I don't take them that seriously, but like I want you to enjoy them. Like, his specialty has always been gameplay, creating actual physical worlds and like making that like sandbox that you play with all the toys and stuff, and that like
right.
that.
I would argue that his worlds do succeed and they become places that you want to kind of hear stories about, which I think is kind of at the crux of what all these timeline people, that's kind of what they're ultimately striving for, right?
That makes sense. But he was never necessarily a proponent of like creating those the details of the story. Like, it didn't seem like he ever put much value into that, because at the end of the day he thought these were just like games, and like maybe it was up to the player to like craft that in their head and stuff.
Right, which is an admirable approach.
And he's been kind of had an antagonistic view of putting more stuff down on paper, essentially, to be like held to those like details.
Right.
He's always said like I never want to pay myself into a corner and stuff and like be shackled by these details when I have a really good game concept. But we said some story stuff in this game, and like fans are going to get upset if we introduce this mechanic and it contradicts
Nomura
that.
is different, right?
Nomura?
No.
That's right.
Onuma,
yeah, sorry.
Well, so just understand that guy was like basically the head honcho. Like, most people like feared him or looked up to him as an icon, even working at Nintendo. So anyone under him, like, it was kind of like his way or the highway. And there's a famous story about him like upending the tea table when he got like upset at people like not like thinking like kind of outside the box, or like thinking too like everyone else, basically. Like, this is too the same as another game. Like, why won't you think about it like this way? Like, try and push yourself, elevate this game to more than just something like casual, or not, I don't want to say casual, but something that's already been done so many times to death. But there were people under him who did come from more of like a story background. The most like in the Zelda community, especially like timeline theorists, they usually point to a guy named Koizumi. And he's the guy who's actually gone on to like direct like Super Mario Galaxy. So he is a really good game designer as well. But he came from kind of like a narrative background. I think he went to like film school, and he like loved storyboarding and wanted to like create like narratives in game. So stick him with like Miyamoto, those two personalities. And like, there are plenty of interviews out there. There's a very famous one with Chris Kohler over at Wired, where he just asked him about like how difficult it was to write stories under Miyamoto when that guy really didn't like that style of game design. Like, don't force the narrative on people, let them take out of the game what they want to. And he would talk about like, I remember I told you that one time, like, he had to like sneak details about like the lore and stuff into NPC conversations when they were originally planned to be part of the actual game, like proper, that you experience over the course of the story unfolding. But Miyamoto would like veto him and be like, no, like that we're wasting too much time on like story.
Does this really happen?
What?
Like that? It really happens like that?
According to the interview, that's how it like went down.
That sounds kind of crazy.
So he would like have to like, anything that was on like the chopping block, he basically had to like sneak into as much as he could into other stuff. And like, that's kind of like the early rumblings of like why, if, the one, there was conflict there. So the creators were in conflict over what constitutes the story of this game. That kind of gives like the natural progression of that like debate is, oh wait, did they even care about a timeline from the beginning? Like, if these guys developing it, who are the decision makers, don't really see the series as something like that, even though you have people on it who do think that way, like, but they're at odds, like, what is like the truth there and stuff.
Well, let's fast forward to the present day, right? And
Yeah.
Nintendo did release a timeline.
Yeah, and to speak to what Marco said, like, Miyamoto kind of like took a backseat to Eiji Aonuma. He was kind of groomed as a successor to take over the Zelda series. And as we saw recently, like, Miyamoto actually has a new smaller group that's heading up new IPs now. And that's like that's where the guy needs to be. He should be making new IPs, making new types of game experiences for people. He doesn't need to be in charge of a series that's like already established, and like it's kind of like the established fan base that buys that games. It's like almost like Final Fantasy, where they kind of expect the same thing, and if you change it too much, there's that whole like balancing act you got to do there. Change it too much, people scream, and like and if it doesn't sell well enough, like the executives look at it as like, that was a bad experiment. Go back to playing it safe. Make another Ocarina of Time game. Sure. When Eiji Aonuma was groomed to take over that series, there's two things he said. He always wanted to make a game that would exceed Ocarina of Time, which leads into a whole nother discussion about maybe why the series hasn't gone where it's needed to gone because of that. But the second thing is he seemed to understand that there's a huge Zelda fan base out there, not just timeline theorist stuff like that, but just general. There are a lot of fans out there who love Zelda. And maybe we should listen to them over general criticisms and stuff. And one of them that he seemed to pick up on, at least the vocal minority that was the loudest, was we care about how these games fit together. And he would go out and he would express that, like, listen, I see fans dedicate so many, even if they're a minority, look at all the stuff they craft out of our games based on like this supposed nuggets of information they've had over the first few games. It's like, you know what, I feel like maybe for whatever reason he goes, I want to make this so-called timeline like more apparent. I want to play to fans' expectations for that. So when he took over, he kind of made a statement that said, listen, while I'm in control of this series, I will do my best to try and make future games fit into the so-called timeline and make sense, but also where I can kind of like, I'll just say it, retcon stuff or add new information that might piece together the older games and stuff. And that's kind of when he took over, is kind of when like the whole concept of timeline really became serious.
Ever since I started working here, like, and started like, talking to you, I always had like here and there you'd always drop the hints like, yeah, I want to redo, or like, go back to like the retrospective Zelda we did like, what, 5 years ago, Brendan?
5 years ago, it was more than that.
More than that, yeah. And that's like how the idea of doing timeline started, like a year ago.
Right, timeline is like the Zelda retrospective on steroids, right?
Yeah, okay. and yeah, like you floated the idea for a while, but it's like, yeah, well, we don't know if there's a timeline still, like, it's still up in the air, and that's when they released that book. And I remember clearly the day you told me, hey, look at this, you showed me on your iPhone. And it's like, they're showing this book, it has the official Zelda timeline, then, all the blogs started showing the official Zelda timeline as told by Nintendo. And that's when you said, well, now's the time to do it. And, you put up forth this crazy script that was like 50 pages long.
I mean, that had been something. I mean, yeah, I think maybe we could take a step back and just like the one thing we haven't like kind of like covered is like kind of like why I really wanted to like do something like this. I mean, if it's not like quite obvious, it's as Marco and Miguel have like trolled me enough here at the office and stuff, is that, I mean, I'll be honest, like when I first got into Zelda, it was the original Zelda on NES. I was a kid, so young then. It was because of the freaking gold box and the gold cartridge, that like trick to get like little kids like, oh, look good. It wasn't even like a twinkle in my eye about like timeline and shit. Even through like A Link to the Past, even Link's Awakening, like the so-called like timeline, that concept didn't exist to me.
I mean, how did you?
It wasn't until like I went on the internet in like the mid '90s, and I came across like website. They were like AOL fan pages back then, because I had America Online, and then I eventually got onto the actual like World Wide Web proper.
Computer in the '90s, you were rich, huh?
Huh? Oh, and I had the internet too, man. It was like a CompuAd something. I forget what the hell brand it was, but it came with like free internet subscription, because that was the thing. Remember, AOL used to pump out those discs all the time. I just like collected those things and like added up the free subscription. But anyway, like found like these things online dedicated to like Zelda. I'm like, and at first I wasn't even that into Zelda. The troll is I was actually into Star Fox. That was my favorite series, and I cared more about the Star Fox universe and crap. And like I had the comics for it from Nintendo Power, and like all this backstory about these characters and stuff. That's what I was more into at the time.
Right. So patient zero for your timeline illness was like some fucking AOL fan page.
Timeline illness.
But yeah, no, I came across, it wasn't even an AOL. There was a Nintendo had their own AOL page, and then there was a link on that to a World Wide Web page for a Zelda fan site. And there was this whole section there. Like the site was crafted together like in the style of like if you were reading a Zelda book. It like had the old medieval page look, like burnt edges and stuff.
Right.
It had MIDI music playing at the time, which back then was like all the shit basically.
Yeah, it was heavy.
And they had a whole section dedicated to like the timeline of Zelda. I'm like, what is this? And I had like a whole like proper timeline with fake dates and crap and like a chronology. And I was like, oh, that kind of looks cool. But at the time, I thought they were like, I took it at face value. I was like, oh damn, this is pretty cool. Like there's like this year zero thing like Hyrule's created, and like what is this? Like they were mixing in like comic book stuff, like the Valiant comics.
Right.
They were taking like non-official source stuff and rolling it into like this like constructed fan theory basically. And it, for the time, I was like, that was pretty cool. And I think,
well, they also had fewer games to work with.
and they had fewer, yeah, it was a little bit more simple, so they tried to embellish it more with like side materials. And I mean, that was like, I was like, dang, this is kind of cool. And like they had like an email group for that, and I just like got on that email chain, and like there was this one dude who like knew everything about like the Zelda games and shit. And I was like, well, I know everything about like Star Fox, but like, damn, I'm really into Zelda. This seems like cooler and shit. Like that's like, so I like followed those guys for like a few years and basically picked up on all this stuff. And then
Is that, are those people still in the timeline theorist community?
I have no idea, man. Those like, I was like a kid, and they're, I mean, one guy,
They were the Mike Damianis of their day.
yeah, the site went the way of the dodo a long, long time ago. And then some of those guys, I think, maybe moved on. But I haven't heard or seen of them from like at least over a decade or something.
Right.
But yeah, basically the kind of shorten it down, like I went through a bunch of fan sites. As years went on and more games came out, the more like intimate and more complex the discussion got about like supposed timeline, to where like whole sections of forums would, on fan sites would be dedicated to this. And then that stuff would become like the headline stuff, like any new interview. It came from being like kind of secondary, kind of like a cult thing that, oh, whatever, we care about like what does the new game look like? What are the visuals like?
That's the question I have. Yeah,
yeah.
like are you timeline theorists considered weirdos in the broader Zelda community?
I think at the beginning it was like whatever, this is fun, but like this is not what's important. To try, I mean, it's really like foggy to remember that far back for me, but I seem to remember it was kind of like the new kind of like hip thing to do then, but like it wasn't exactly like the most popular thing.
Right.
In terms of people want to know about like when Zelda news came about in an interview, they didn't give a shit about where the game took place and stuff. It was like, what's the setting? What are the dungeons like?
Right.
What are the new what are the new cool weapons and stuff? That's what people cared about. Like, oh, you're gonna ride a horse in a new like
rightfully
N60.
so.
Like
I
people were
mean,
like, oh
that's
man,
the
that's
point.
amazing. Like it's gonna be in 3D. Like,
Right.
and I was like that too. I was like, dang, I don't care the storyline stuff. Whatever. I want to
Right.
play this game.
What about more recently though? Like when you started, I guess, to participate in the timeline community, as it more or less resembles now. Like, are you guys considered like the oddballs, or is it?
I would honestly say like nowadays. Well, first of all, I mean, the broader thing is like, I think the Zelda fan base is kind of decentralized from fan sites. I think general fan sites have kind of gotten in the way of the dodo a little bit.
Yeah.
They've kind of like spread out to like social media and like the broader umbrella sites, like dedicated gaming forums and like game help sites. But in general, I think it actually is kind of like almost a badge of honor for some Zelda fans that like, hey, I've come up with a timeline theory. Like it's like almost like an initiation thing. Like, hey, cool, you like Zelda and stuff. Like, so which one's your favorite one? Like, do you like the Wind Waker? That's always, do you like Wind Waker, Ocarina of Time, or Wind Waker, Twilight Princess visual style? And then like the third one's like, so like, do you believe in a split timeline? Or are you single timeline? Like,
Right.
It usually was those three.
What about this? I mean, and this relates kind of to your feature. Like, it would seem to me that the fact that Nintendo released this what appears to be like a cobbled together ass timeline, that seems like evidence that there kind of wasn't one to begin with. But from talking to you, there are still people that hold on to the idea that what they put out in the Hyrule Historia book is not actually what some person in the past originally conceived of, and that there is this actual true timeline that is not reflected in that
Yeah,
book.
I think that's the big question is what are we defining as truth being like the ultimate truth for the timeline? Is
Well, the
it
ultimate-
truth of like what they intended it to be? Is it truth from like what Nintendo's official statement is? Is it truth like we're entering Shigeru Miyamoto's brain? Or is it truth like Hyrule truth? Like this truth just exists in this game period without, doesn't matter what anybody says, this is just the way these stories go.
Right. Well, I think most, like, you know, not, I don't mean this offensively, but most fans who are reasonable or like not super entrenched in this world will just accept that official timeline and say, all right, this is it. You know, discussion's over.
Yeah, I
Game
assume
over,
like
son.
most people are right to
The
fall
end.
into that assumption, you know, because obviously, you know, they're just enjoying a game first and foremost.
Right.
But you know, I do see Mike's point though, like, you know, like when Battlestar Galactica got rebooted, for example, like I was like, okay, does this really happen after the original Battlestar? Is this a reboot? Is this a prequel? And you know, it turns out it's a complete reimagining, and you know, that sort of stuff happens within franchises. And I always saw Zelda as kind of like that.
Right, but what's unique about this is that Nintendo made an official statement in the form of this timeline. But like, am I right to say that there are still some people in your community who don't take that as the truth still?
I would say there's, yeah, there are still. I would say there's probably a good amount of people who don't accept it, and just by going like, for how long these people have been discussing this stuff, it's probably twofold. One, it's psychological. These people have been attached to the idea that their theories or whatever had some kind of merit. Like it was like, I put in a lot of research, it's plausible. There's always been these holes that no one could fill except Nintendo, and as long as those holes existed, your theory was just as good, my theory was just as good as your theory, basically. Like
Right.
no one was right. There were like, it was like a pastime to argue about, find the holes in people's timelines and stuff. It was like a cool, it was like almost like a meta puzzle game type thing going on there, and it was
Right.
like, and then I think this time, the official timeline to put out, I think it's getting the same treatment. It's just been a little slower. Like, I think people were just so shocked that it came out of nowhere. Like at first, when the word came out that there was going to be an official chronology, people thought it was going to be like a release order. Like, there's no way Nintendo's going to say this. Like, just a
Right.
few months ago, they were saying they don't want to give out an official timeline ever because they like leaving it up to fans and imagination, which is code word like, we don't really know what it is probably, or if we do, we just don't want to give it out because then we're going to be like locked into this order and you guys will like crucify us if we ever break from this like official canon.
Right.
So people are still shocked by it, but like, even after like we put out our video and stuff, even after people have like translated all the pages and stuff, it's not even out it's not even out in English yet. But enough people have gone through and translated it that you can read all the pertinent information. But even after that, I still find epic rants about that are probably longer than our final version of the script for Timeline
Right.
that explain why Hyrule Historia is factually incorrect, that there's like that there's existing lines and stuff in the games and stuff that actively contradict what's in there.
Right. So they use the games as evidence, or do they like?
They use what actually transpires in a game or what's said in a game to they say it's been contradicted
Right.
in Hyrule Historia.
Right, but I mean, all that points to the fact that these people must believe that there was somehow like a steward that was keeping the timeline intact. Like, yeah.
I think it all centers around Ocarina of Time. I mean, like that's because that's where they split the three, and nobody predicted that, right? Like nobody was crazy enough to have three timelines.
To be clear, yeah, and to be clear, we didn't like. This is the one probably biggest fault of the video that didn't do a proper job of that I've had to like kind of like clarify to some people is like the act of Link dying didn't actually create the third timeline. Because someone like people are like, okay, well, how does that cause a split by him dying? Like, were there two versions of him? What technically happened is, so the game started and there's a start of the order of the timeline. Just clone it. Basically, there's two timelines running side by side doing exactly the same thing up to Ocarina of Time. Then in one timeline, everything you saw in game happens where it splits, like young Link, adult Link shit happens. But in this clone timeline, Link just dies. It like there's no split. It doesn't die what happened. Like
in the other universe, he jumps in a warp pipe and goes to fucking Metroid.
I mean, well, here's the thing. Like I think that's where people are struggling to accept this is because two reasons. One, like that kind of like flies in the face of everything people have been trying to like put together that were into timeline theories, and two, at least to like me, and there are other people echo this, it feels like it's kind of like diminishing the value of every game that comes in. Like the older games have always kind of been like the biggest problem because they had the least information about them. They were made at a time where I would argue, even if they were was a so-called timeline in some master document they've had since day one, it wasn't at the forefront. Like they probably didn't even know Legend of Zelda was going to be a popular series. Like, we only get one chance to make one game.
Right,
Who gives a shit about the
and
story?
Like, the majority of games back then weren't concerned with like the kind of all of this comes from a desire to create long-lasting, valuable franchises and IPs, right? Like back then in the video game industry, like that wasn't a concern. Like they weren't the entertainment properties that they were today. So it just stands to reason, right, that they were kind of just thinking about these things in a more transitory sense.
Well, that's why I think Ocarina of Time is like that crossing point. Like, it was definitely way more cinematic. And the question is, to the validity of this timeline that they've just released, were they at the time, like making Ocarina of Time, being like, totally, 3 timelines, totally. Like, they were like, was that in their brains when they made that game? And I don't think any Zelda fan can honestly say it was.
Yeah.
So that's the big question with this new timeline. It's like, well, they obviously just thought of this now.
But it's to appease the fans.
You know what? I think that they're like working somewhere in the Nintendo apparatus. There's somebody like Mike Damiani who's like really into this shit, and they went to that guy and they said, "Hey, we're coming out with this book. What the fuck's our timeline?" And that guy was like, "All right, hold on, let me go look at all this shit." And that guy, like, he had the prevailing theory, but he also was like, you know what, man, there is a fucking third timeline. You know why? Because I say so. And he put it in there, and that's what we got.
Well, my other question is, do you think they did that to be purposely different than a lot of the timelines that were created by theorists? It's because if they came up with a timeline that was very similar to a theorist's timeline, then you have like this whole section of fans being like, "Aha, we were right the whole time."
Well, the thing is that all those fan timelines, they never stuck because they always had holes in them. Because, let's be honest, the games were not meant to be put together like that. So when they had holes in them, it's like the only way to fix those holes is by doing what Mike said, is that third, what if timeline. And that's what happened. I mean, that's what we say in the video, right?
Yeah. I mean, to answer your question, technically there are people. I don't think anyone. Okay, I find it very unlikely that anyone came up with the solution, because I haven't read like theories in years and stuff like that. I kind of like tuned that out. At one point, I basically just told myself, like, listen, like, timeline stuff was fun to debate over, and I think I've gotten out of it as much as I'm gonna get. But at the time I accepted the truth. Like, one, there probably is some like timeline that like some dude's gonna say someday, but until Nintendo says it, we're never gonna know it. Like, this is a futile effort. The only, like, the end result is futile. The enjoyment is out of like engaging other people and like debating and stuff. Like, that's where the enjoyment of it comes out of. But otherwise, it's a futile effort to think you're going to be the one person who was going to ever solve it.
Right.
So to that, I find it highly unlikely that anyone theorized that Link died and that was the solution. However, there were people who theorized in Ocarina of Time, because he jumps multiple times back and forth, that it created multiple timelines. And there are people who actually, in recent years, supposedly thought there were more than 2 timelines, and that's how it could count for everything. So I don't think any one person had the exact theory that Nintendo had, but I do think Nintendo has read a bunch of the best crafted theories.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah, like there's a Mike Damiani in there.
They probably like, look, okay, this makes sense, and it does fall in line with what we said. So why don't we just adopt that officially? It's never been said in any game. This information does not exist. But let's just take that, and maybe we tweak it a bit to so it sounds like we have the authority, that we're the authoritative ones here. But it's essentially what other people came up with.
I want to ask you, though, what do you believe today, Mike? You're representing the timeline theorists right now. You're speaking for all of them.
I showed you that one. I put up that article once. I tried to like give my point of view in terms of why I thought the timeline is what it is today.
Yeah, I was too busy inserting false paragraphs to like actually.
Yeah, I know. We were having a good time with that. So essentially, my honest, trying to be stand back, most unbiased kind of view, if that's possible, is that from day one, there probably wasn't a grand timeline, at least not encompassing all the games we know today. At best, there was probably like a loose mythology that some guy wrote up, either Tezuka or Miyamoto and Tezuka together. And by the way, it's Takashi Tezuka, who's also like technically like the co-creator of Zelda along with Miyamoto, and he's gone on to direct a lot of other awesome games as well. Him and Koizumi actually were the ones who did the like Galaxy games over at EAD Tokyo over at Nintendo.
Mm-hmm.
But basically, I think there was a loose chronology because I mean, Zelda 1 and Zelda 2, like they made it a sequel. They even like put that nugget, like, oh, you see the bottom of the left of the map. That was the overworld of the original game. Here's like the broader world in Zelda 2. Like they kind of threw a little bit of like Easter egg information like that.
Right.
But I think at some point around the time between that and Ocarina of Time, when Koizumi came in along with a guy named Kensuke Tanabe, these guys who were the like writing guys, writing staff basically, I think there was interviews that even said like they were told craft a mythology for this series. We need something more in depth because we're going to be making more games. We need more story to work with. You guys are in charge of it. And these guys, I think at that point, looked at what they had already, built upon that, and crafted out something a little bit more like richer storyline to span more games.
Right.
So I think phase one was like a little loose, basic mythology that could span maybe 1, 2, maybe 3 games. No all-encompassing timeline. Then a few years down the road, around the N64 era, they crafted out a little bit larger, like kind of continuity and stuff.
Well,
and
are you when you say mythology, are you imagining like a kind of vast timeline where they kind of projected the events of other games?
I
or
think
like,
it's more going backwards.
what that sounds
that's
like
why
to
they made
me.
so many prequels, is because they made stuff that happened before these games. Like they kept developing like the creation of Hyrule story. Like,
Right, yeah,
these
like-
events that took place in the past, kind of like Lord of the. I mean, if you've only read or watched Lord of the Rings, you've never read anything else, and you've only know about those stories.
Right.
And then you find and you thought those were self-contained things, like the first few Zelda games, and you find out, oh, like Tolkien made all this like backstory, like going
Right,
back
yeah,
to the
exactly.
first
It's
age.
mythology
Like, yeah,
in
it's that
the actual
stuff.
sense, as opposed to
Yes.
like the Hollywood story Bible
Exactly.
mythology sense.
Exactly. They were building like the world basically where these games took place. It's like, well, if we have these events, we could build off those. And I think that's what led into the N64 era. Then I think when Aonuma took over and we got the more recent games, it was more of a direct storyline, not mythology. It's like, okay, we got a world that exists for us. We have all this lore created for backstory. We need to start connecting these games together. So he started he made like the Wind Waker, then they made like Phantom Hourglass and Spirit Tracks, and those games connected together.
They
And
connected to each other, right?
Yeah,
but-
and he made Majora's Mask. That was a direct sequel to Ocarina of Time. Like the one, and then he helped with Capcom make the Oracle and the Minish Cap games, like the Four Swords trilogy, which they all connected. Like he was making games that at least had some connection to a previous game. Like the one curveball was Twilight Princess, and I think that's where more people got involved with that game, and like he kind of got like overridden because it became such a big deal, because one was supposed to be like a marquee GameCube game, and then it got like delayed to be on Wii, and then like Iwata got involved, so
Right.
I think he kind of got like pushed out a little bit, and even Miyamoto said he had to like come in and kind of like clean that game up a bit, or oversee the final production of that. So I think Twilight Princess is the odd man out because that game made things more complicated. It's like it didn't make anything easier for anyone, although he promised it would try and be like a bridging gap. But I think that's kind of like the three phases, like very borderline, like what any NES game has, like a few manual, maybe the player's guide said shit back in like the 80s and early 90s. Then they brought in like new people and like, all right, we're gonna flesh out like the lore of this series, not like the order of the games, but like what happened up from this point to the beginning of time in the series. Let's create like the literal like mythology for this game. And then more recently, to like, wow, like recognizing what they probably perceive as a large part of the fan base. Who knows how big it really is? These Zelda timeline theorizing is like a popular thing. Like this, like people care about this stuff, and like
Right.
we get. Journalists were doing. This is before I was still in like school and stuff. Like journalists were doing their part to help theorists along as well. Like they were playing into it. Like every big interview from like EGM or IGN would always, the big question everyone like they'd say for last, like, where in the timeline does this take place? What is the overall timeline? And maybe that was a product that time where journalists were a little bit more like fanboys themselves or whatever. But those questions always came up in the media, and I think that trickled down to fans like, wow, even they care about, like, this is important stuff that they're taking. It was, I mean, that's how the feedback worked back then.
Right.
And so the Nintendo was seeing that, like, wow, the press are asking us a lot about the timeline. Like, maybe we should take it a little bit more seriously. And,
Well, you know, you want a more cynical reading of that is Nintendo, has fairly recently realized that they have a franchise on the order of things like Marvel Comics or Star Wars that they could exploit in ways that they currently aren't. So let us give that thing the trappings that all of these other, like, you know, very lucrative and timeless IPs have, which is this kind of, like, you know, boring continuity that will let us, like, write fucking comics or whatever the hell we want to do, you know?
And you're specifically referencing, like, the fact that they put out the book.
The Hyrule Historia.
I mean, at that point, I agree with you. At that phase, I think they realized, like, hey, like, why don't we take advantage of that? And, like, how, you know, disingenuous, like, those motivations were for them, whether, like, oh, we're doing it for the fans. I think it's more like Zelda series is kind of like at a tipping point. Like, Skyward Sword wasn't that well received, and it sell as well as expectations. Like, we need to keep the series relevant. Like, all those articles came out saying, is Zelda relevant anymore, blah, blah, blah. So, like, you know what? Let's play it safe. Let's, like, if we have this vast universe of stuff that, like, fans take for face value, at least a lot of them do, apparently, let's just play to that. Let's, like, build this world out and stuff, and, like, they'll love us for it. You know, it'll create more fans, it'll create more discussions, like, keep that thing going, basically. Keep people talking about this game, even when there's no games on the horizon. They've said, oh, we're working on new games. We don't know what the hell, there's no new announced games.
Right.
But yet, people are still, like, actively discussing Zelda. Like, how many other series can you say, like, have that many people, like, really, like, caring about it? Like, usually they just want to know new information about the game, and, like, or they're back replaying the old game, but, like, I don't think to the extent, there are a few series that do this, but I don't think to the extent that Zelda has been able to enjoy, like, the amount, like, the amount that the fans kind of carry the series on their shoulders. Like, they do a lot of the legwork for the developers. When you have that dedicated of a fan base, like, you really don't have to do that much to, like, keep them happy and stuff. And, like, even this, I think, putting out that book, even if it was just some dude, like, trying to cherry pick stuff and try and make something that made some kind of sense, the fact that people are just arguing it and stuff, like, it's win-win for them. Who cares if the fan base rejects it? Whatever. They're gonna, like, tear it apart and be like, we want the next game even more so we can see what the hell really happened. Like, that I don't see it as being anything but, like, benefiting Nintendo. And as in terms of, like, whether or not, like, I mean, I do agree with you that, like, they saw it more of, like, this wasn't the grand scheme. We didn't have this end game planned that one day we release Hyrule Historia with this master timeline. Like, I think they were always just saying what fans wanted to hear.
Right.
As evident by how many times they flip-flopped on statements, how many times, like, they weren't ever sure of themselves. Like, they just say stuff, and, like, it almost seemed like kind of like Kojima trolling it sometimes. Like, especially that answer that we put in the video about, like, the Wind Waker. Maybe there was another explanation. And, like, that interview, if you read it, it's like, one guy has to stop the other and goes, actually, no, there's two endings in that game. He's like, oh yeah, and it's just like laughing, chuckling, ha ha ha, and it's like, and then it's like, there's a more complicated explanation for where this game takes place. Like, the fact that they're even, like, saying it like that, like, oh, you could interpret it this way, they're just playing around at that point. I mean, obviously they've given enough thought to even bring it up, but I think they're having as much fun as the fans are. Like,
well, I think the fans are taking it deathly seriously, whereas it's clear that the developers at least aren't taking it as seriously as they are.
Yeah, the problem is no person has ever, like, just straight up asked the question. Even I didn't do it in that one time I had the chance to interview, like, the NOA guys. I was kind of, like, more cared about, like, Skyward Sword since that was the game coming out. The one question that just needs to be asked, and I don't know if you'd ever get an honest answer, is just, like, did you guys from the beginning really care about the timeline? Like, does it matter that much? Like, getting those kind of, like, perspective answers. Like, don't tell us what the timeline is. Like, how do you view this? Like, what are your honest thoughts on, like, this? Was it ever planned from the beginning? Do you, like, really listen to fans? Like, get that answer out there. And I think all these answers that people take deathly serious, there's not enough, like, background information to know the, like, context. Like, you weren't there at the interview. You didn't know what was exactly asked. Like, there's just transcripts translated from Japanese to English. Like, there's something might be lost there. And that's an unknown that I think some people rationalize away as, like, whatever, this is, like, serious. They wouldn't say it unless they actually meant it. Like, there are people who just, like, think like that. They don't want to acknowledge it, but that's the one thing, like, the elephant in the room that no one really takes the time to acknowledge that could destroy everything. It's like, these guys could just be bullshitting with you. And like,
Of course, and you know
yeah.
you yourself have conducted interviews that have been translated from Japanese to English via an interpreter, and like unless you
Yeah.
understand what they're saying, you're really kind of at the mercy of the interpreter's translation.
And it's not even that, like, just like a bit of inside information. Like, when you do most interviews that I've done, like, you ask the question in English, and then on the fly, a translator translates that to the best of their ability into Japanese.
Right.
Then the guy, the person you're interviewing gives this usually lengthy answer in Japanese. Some translators take notes, but they're speaking so fast. Then they have to, on the fly, translate that back into English. And you know they're doing shortcuts and stuff. Like, you're not getting the full exact answer. You're
Right,
getting, like,
and
you're
especially
getting, like,
because in most
yeah.
of these situations, you're doing so under like time constraints.
Yes.
You have 10 minutes to talk to
Exactly.
them, and there's like 5 other journalists waiting in line behind you to get to their interviews. Et
I
cetera.
mean, yeah, like, the only way that would ever work is if, like, you had someone translate the questions yourself into Japanese ahead of time. You got, and that person you trusted to ask those questions to them, and then you recorded those answers, and then have that same person come into the office and like subtitle, like literally translate it out and go like, here's my translation of it.
Yeah.
Like, that's the only, I think that'd be closer to what Zelda fans think is happening.
Right.
But that's never happening. Like that's like the,
Very seldomly, you know. I mean,
Yeah.
there are journalists out there who are fluent in Japanese and who can conduct them themselves and stuff.
And the opportunities for that to ever happen are also not very frequent. Like, you don't get access to these types of guys.
Right.
Especially
And-
nowadays.
And
like,
frankly, if you're interviewing Miyamoto,
you don't.
are you
wanna-
gonna ask him about the fucking timeline, or are you gonna like talk to him about other stuff?
Yeah, it would have
you
to
know?
be like an evergreen type interview. Like, hey, like Nintendo, like we're doing a feature on the like timelines and stuff. Like, is there any chance we could just have a sit down with like some of the Zelda team and like just have a casual conversation about like their thoughts on the timeline? We're not gonna ask you stupid like really nitpicky fan questions. Like, we just want to have like a discussion, like your thoughts on it, like whatever you say. Like, we won't intervene. Like, you know, just talk about it. That would be like the best thing I could ever hope for. That like that would be like that we could show off to people. I think that would be good for people to see if that could ever happen. But short of that happening, I think things will continue as business. There'll be people who are on the outside looking in who are like, okay, like, cool, they throw a few connections here and there, but you're crazy to think like they put this much like effort and stock into like the stories and stuff. Okay, they put out a book, but I see that as like, you know, what Marvel and them, like, they're trying to make it like a franchise, like
Right,
that
they're
with
they're
lore.
trying to make it a legitimate
Yeah.
Hollywood franchise. You know, I mean Hollywood in loose terms, right? They're trying to make this like a salable sort of evergreen franchise that can not only sustain games but also all other kinds of media. And this is my interpretation, of
Yeah.
course.
And then-
Very cynical, probably, but
That's the one side of it, and I think there'll always be people on the other side of like, they'll be like, you know, you're ignorant and stuff. Like, you haven't been at this as long as I have. Like, these guys wouldn't have said this stuff unless they really meant it. Like, we have all these years of evidence of quotes and like stuff that if it all matches up. So why does it match up if they're not being truthful and stuff like? I mean, that's the other view. You get those two views, and very rarely do you ever find someone who can like be kind of like middle ground in that. Like, usually by just how, I guess, fierce those arguments get, you naturally kind of gravitate to one or the other. It gets so freaking polar there that like when you walk in the middle, you either ignored or you just see it so long you just gravitate towards one side because you get so sick of one side or the other, or you just walk away altogether. Like, the third thing is I just don't give a shit either way. Like, I just play Zelda games to have fun. I don't give a shit about anything with story. Like, we get those people. There's some commenters like, this is a really good video and stuff, but like, I honestly do not give a two shits about Zelda Timeline or stories. Like, I just care about like playing in dungeons and shit. Like, it could be like you can replace Link with whatever the fuck you want, but I'm not invested in that world. I'm invested in the gameplay mechanics.
right.
And
What about the fact that A Link to the Past is the only good Zelda game?
the fact is this,
Trolling begins.
Oh yeah, are we
I'm
having
just fucking
objective
with-
reviews now?
I'm just fucking with you,
No,
man.
no, but going through the video though, I think though that even though the subject, you know, some people might find it ridiculous, some people might not believe it, some people don't even know it exists. The fact that it can make, you know, someone sit down and watch 40 minutes of it, you know, that you know, at least there's something there that, you know, even if people that are non-believers or people that don't care about it,
Yeah, you see, I
you know,
don't
can find
think,
it entertaining.
Right, I don't think wanting to watch a video about the Zelda timeline means that you are kind of like entrenched in this, you know, years-long debate. It's just a cool video to watch and see all the Zelda games. And
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, that kind of might segue into what we want to talk about next. But I mean, that was kind of like the most difficult thing to figure out is what was this video really going to do? Because you have someone like me who could like give you like a 10-hour video if that wasn't like restricted. And like there's enough information there. You can go as deep as you want to with this subject matter. There's enough content there, but it's like how long can you really hold the average person's attention for this type of stuff? And like what does the focus need to be? Like you have 25 years of this debate and this much information about a series as like the series doesn't have the most games of any series, but has a lot of games for what they are. These long, like 30, 40-hour games as like 15, 16 on counting plus. And how do you truncate all that information into a video that gets its message across clearly and doesn't like alienate even like the most like clueless person? Like you want someone who to be able to watch this to be able to follow it, to enjoy it, but at the same time, you don't want those like those really dedicated fans, like the ones you want them to feel. I wanted them to feel like, at the very least, yeah, they got their shit right. Like they covered all the facts that they presented there. They were right, and it does make sense. I am a little bummed that they didn't cover this, or this, but I understand that this is more understandable to the average person.
Has anybody just straight up like taken just complete offense at the video and been like, this is a fucking heresy?
No. I mean, no, I have not seen that. I mean, someone might have said that, I just haven't seen it. I'm not going to claim that I've seen every bit of criticism, good or bad. I think the most critical thing I saw was from the same person who wrote the epic essay about why the official timeline is wrong. Wrote like, they said like, yeah, the video gets some facts wrong, but like the facts they do get wrong aren't their fault. It's Hyrule Historia's fault because they have the facts in there are wrong. But they go for how they presented it. Like they basically were still complimenting us. Like what they put together there makes sense and is like generally right. Like even like the staunchest, like a 10 years ago version of me, equivalent watching it. Like that's what the person I equate to is like. They're like me 10 years ago, basically.
There's a guy that says that the official timeline by Nintendo is wrong.
Oh, he wrote like a giant essay, bullet point by bullet point, of everything that's like wrong in it, and gives the evidence why it's wrong.
There's a guy that says that Martin's timeline on Game of Thrones is wrong.
Right.
You know.
Oh, we should have gotten that guy to fucking write this thing.
Because I didn't know that. That's insane. Man. That's crazy. Wow.
I mean, I did. This video, I mean, that's another angle. Like, if we tried to even cover that subject matter, that's opening a whole different can of worms. Like,
I want this to be like a series like Ancient Aliens, you know? Like, I want you to
You got the guy with the hair.
Yeah. Someone posted that image on one of the message boards. Like, every time I hear the GT video say theorist, I think of this guy. I mean, Photoshop timeline theorist.
I think of Mike in a diaper, like.
Yeah, going to the video though. Going to the video though, like when I read the script the first time, like for that first draft you showed me, that was like 40 pages long. It was huge, and it was pretty long.
It's like 27.
It depends on the type.
I think it was 27.
You used like
type 5 it was 12 font. Yeah. Well, everyone else writes that up till I came to Game Trailers, everything I've ever written has been in 12 point.
Yeah, we use 16 here because Brandon's aging eyes can't read.
So yeah, like
I got news for you. I might have to go up to 18 in 2013.
Oh god. Oh, so yeah, we use I hadn't accounted for that. So maybe it was a bit longer. But
okay. So yeah, but there were. I mean, I want to show like I cut this video like on and off for like 2 months and a half, maybe 3, and it was kind of like well, I wouldn't call it the black sheep of the office, but it was like the Bobby Burns, our post-production supervisor. He, like it was hard to manage having one editor going back to the same project over and over, trying to revise it. And many of the problems were, obviously, like we were striving to do something at a production level that was never done before here. And that coupled with this, like every time I watched it, even like every time I did any render, and Dan, Dan Raxon, the other graphics guy, we sat down and like we popped all these graphics out, and it was all like we're putting this aspect of the video together, but still the story, like even for me, someone that's played almost every Zelda game or every main Zelda game, not counting like some of the spin-offs on on handhelds, for example, I still found it like hard to digest. and you know, I want to show like on you know, on this podcast like a little bit of one of, you know, one of the segments that we cut out, and so you guys see why we cut it out and why it's you know, it's still like, you know, it's kind of fan servicey, I guess, to show like, you know, some you know, explain some of the details about, you know, the princess of from, you know.
I remember that whole big ass part that, from my interpretation, you just pulled out of like a picture of some weird ass prince with his city getting attacked by like pig-faced Ganons.
That's from the Adventure of Link.
Yeah, I was like, what the fuck is this, Mike?
Yeah, well, let's show the clips.
The first thing to know is that all 3 timelines started the same way: Skyward Sword followed by the Minish Cap and 4 swords. So what exactly happened between the end of Skyward Sword and the start of the Minish Cap? According to Hyrule Historia, sometime after Link and Zelda settled on the surface after defeating Demise, the Sage of Light, Rauru, constructed the Temple of Time around the only entrance to the Sacred Realm, which housed the Triforce. The Sacred Realm was sealed with the Master Sword, along with the ability to pass through time. The Master Sword's pedestal was closed off behind the Door of Time, and 3 sacred stones acted as keys, which were guarded by the trusted people of the forest, the people of water, and the people of fire. The Triforce was enshrined in the Temple of Light, and Rauru was isolated from the world inside the Sacred Realm to continue to protect the power of the gods. The first, sometimes referred to as the Fallen Hero timeline, is what can best be described as an alternate scenario in Ocarina of Time where Ganondorf killed Link during their final battle. As a result, he obtained all parts of the Triforce, and Zelda and the sages were forced to seal him in the Sacred Realm with the unified Triforce in his possession. However, this wasn't enough to keep him imprisoned, and after some time, evil began to radiate from the seal. The King of Hyrule then ordered the 7 sages to reinforce the seal, while the Knights of Hyrule held back the evil. The sages succeeded, and the entrance to the Sacred Realm was sealed off. After these events, A Link to the Past takes place, which is then followed by the Oracle games and wrapped up with Link's Awakening. It was always conceivable that these 4 games occurred in this order, and there's little mystery here. What's interesting is the explanation of how The Legend of Zelda and The Adventure of Link fit in. Hyrule Historia says that after Ganon's demise, the Triforce was guarded by the royal family of Hyrule. While at first it was used wisely by the King of Hyrule, there came a time when no worthy successor arose to use its full potential. The threat of evil lingered, and the Triforce was coveted by those seeking power. The king was growing old and feared that his kingdom would fall into ruin, so he placed a spell upon Hyrule. It would reveal the one worthy enough to possess the unified Triforce, and a crest would mark the back of their hand as proof. Knowing he had to protect the sacred relic, the king split it up and hid the Triforce of Courage, only entrusting its secret location to his daughter. The years passed by, and the kingdom fell further into decay without an heir worthy enough to wield the full might of the Triforce. After the king passed away, the prince should have inherited the entire Triforce, but was only left the Triforce of Wisdom and Power. The prince learned that his sister knew the resting place of the final piece, Courage, and begged her to divulge its location. When she refused, he consulted with his trusted advisor, a wizard of great talent, who promised to wrestle the secrets from the princess. The wizard failed in his efforts, and in a fit of rage, cast a sleeping spell upon the young maiden. When the grief-stricken prince learned of this treacherous deed, he ordered that every female born in the royal family from then on carry the name Zelda.
Okay, so...
yeah, like, basically the first version was a little bit of a lore dump. And the thing was, I was getting caught on, besides, there are general issues that are usually discussed in the Zelda timeline community that are related to the broader picture of the timeline, but they're usually like more like, kind of like tangent stuff that kind of get caught in that like whirlwind of the timeline debate. And so I was getting like hooked on that mentality that certain things had to be covered in this video, like certain mysteries that always like, because the official timeline did come with, from Nintendo, did come with explanations about secondary stuff, like things that hadn't really been explained, but even if they weren't explained, wouldn't have any impact on the overall timeline. It was just something that was mentioned in some point in a game and was never really expanded upon, basically. And so I was getting caught on those types of things. Like another good example besides the Zelda 2 backstory crap was in Phantom Hourglass, the whole thing about where the world the game took place in. Remember the whole explanation about how it was created, what it really was, because, you know, if you're a timeline theorist, like, okay, like, they traveled to another world. What's this other world? Where'd it come from? Like, you have those, they had those natural kind of like questions, like when you encounter something new, and they were never really answered. And then like the return at the end of the game, they return back to their normal world, like to the where they came from. And people are like, all right, like, we want some answers here. And then like Ira Story comes along and like explains some of that stuff. And I was trying to like work that in there, like, so we'd like natural progression, like, so Phantom Hourglass was a sequel to The Wind Waker.
I can show. Let me show that clip.
So you'll show it, and you'll see what it's like here.
Finally, there's the adult Link timeline, which consisted of The Wind Waker, Phantom Hourglass, and lastly, Spirit Tracks. The only real mysteries revolved around certain things that transpired between Ocarina of Time and The Wind Waker. After the princess returned Link back to his original time, it was decided to hide the Triforce of Courage that the hero of time left behind. It was split up into 8 fragments, each placed within a well-guarded area. When Ganon broke free of the Sacred Realm, it was up to King Daphnis no Hansen Hyrule to find a way to save his people. He believed that the hero of time would return once again to stop Ganon. The hero never appeared though, and the king and his people were forced to pray to the gods for a miracle. Not content to let Ganon win the day, the gods delivered an answer in the form of a great flood, but not before commanding the people to seek refuge. However, the king stood tall like a captain on a sinking ship, while his people fled to safety. He remained below the waves, watching over the seal that imprisoned Ganon. When the evil fiend managed to escape his bonds, the king awoke from his slumber, but was unable to return to the surface. So, instead, he used his magic to take the form of a talking boat, the King of Red Lions, in order to seek out a hero to help him. What he found on the surface were the descendants of his loyal subjects scattered across tiny islands. Many changes occurred over the years, including 2 drastic alterations. The gentle forest children, the Kokiri, had transformed into the wood creatures known as the Korax, and the aquatic race of Zora evolved into the avian Rito. Link and Tetra decided to honor the king's final wish and set sail for a new land at the end of the Wind Waker. After months of travel, they encountered a ghost ship and decided to investigate. That's when the duo were pulled into an entirely different realm, one that wasn't fully understood at first. Hyrule Historia explained that realm existed separate from the Great Sea and Hyrule, but the same goddesses that left the Triforce behind also created it. It was possible to cross between the realms, as evident by Link and Tetra returning back to their ship in the end and seeing their companion Lineback, a morally conflicted pirate, sailing off into the distance. Though the fate of Link was left to the imagination, Tetra's 5th-generation descendant turned out to be the princess during Spirit Tracks. Cut off from the legendary kingdom, the lineage of those tied to the goddesses and old Hyrule are growing thin. So going forward, a new history would be spun.
And so, yeah, as you can see, like, that type of stuff was like kind of like the initial hook. Like, we were wasting a lot of real estate on these types of, like, you know, segments, basically. And ultimately, while probably the, like, more, well, like, timeline theorists would have enjoyed that, to see that it played out on screen. Ultimately, I think it was too much of, like, a sidestep away from the ultimate, like, message we needed to focus on. Yeah. But those, it's like the equivalent, like, a lot of the complaints about people are saying about, like, The Hobbit right now, like the pacing and stuff. Like, those extra things thrown in there that, like, are cool for extended cuts and stuff, but ultimately, like, the audience loses interest. Like,
you see, I'll like, on my part, I don't mind watching something that is made for, like, a very specific audience, even if that doesn't include me. I have no problem with that, and I think, you know, stuff would generally be better if people are doing things that they themselves like, as opposed to trying to appeal to some, you know, amorphous, unknown third party. My problem with that, at least from editing it, though, is that it quickly became like an alphabet soup of, like, ridiculous Hyrule names. So, you know, there's probably a way to have made that work, but when dealing with, like, this script that is already kind of like mammoth, you know,
it would
probably good to.
It would. The only solution was we needed to go more in depth, and it's like, listen, like, this video is gonna get way too long. Like, even I was starting to, like, when Marco was pointing out stuff in the edits, and, like, that was probably the thing I was always hesitant about, is, like, I really wanted to see these cuts, because deep down I knew, like, I need to see how this looks on screen. Like, I know how it sounds here, but, like, I need to see how it plays out, because this might just make no sense, or this might just be terrible. We just don't need this. And like as I sat down with Marco and we'd watch these segments that he kind of already been working on, like I don't know about this part, Mike. This seems a little like goofy here. Like this isn't gonna work. We started to realize like the only solution is either we cut this out because is it really integral to the message we're trying to get across in this video, or do we expand upon it? And at one point we did try with the Zelda 2 backstory. We tried a different approach, and while if you're reading a Wikipedia entry for the Zelda story, that would have been good for there. Jesus Christ, that was like an epic lore dump that I think people would just like. It would have been like interesting if you really cared about it, and it wasn't as problematic I think as the earlier stuff, but it was just getting so long and so bogged down by that type of stuff. Like you'd have this huge epic backstory about like what happened before Zelda 2 and Zelda 1, like the whole like old king, like the king of Hyrule having to split the Triforce, sleeping Zelda stuff, blah blah blah. That was taking up so much time, and then you like, oh, and after all that, now we bring it back to like how this game connects to this game. It's like, holy shit, you just like lost me in like this lengthy thing. It's like, imagine if like every part in like Fellowship of the Ring, like the parts they cut out, like they put the equivalent of the intro every now and then. Like they did something like a 5-6 minute visual exposition sequence to explain like Tom Bombadil or something. And by the way, there's this character.
Right. But like I said, there's probably a way to make that interesting, but within the structure that you picked for this, it kind of became like a bit like ponderous or something.
But we only had like, I mean, it was originally slated to be a half-hour video.
Originally, our limit was supposed to be 12 minutes.
Well, yeah, and that kept growing, and part of the reason was because we wanted to tell, like, I think like Timeline as a whole, like, and we can talk, I guess, about future timelines maybe, but like as a whole, this series I think works better if you just find, like, every game story and every franchise has like, you know, within its story like maybe a controversial aspect to it, like, you know, Mass Effect, the ending, or Dark Souls, how obscure the story is. And you can, if you focus on those interesting aspects of those timelines and those stories, and with Zelda, it was, you know, the evolution of this, you know, fan-made timeline that eventually sort of became official, you know, over 25 years. And you know, you wanted to tell that story first, right? Like that was like the first part of the video, and the second part of the video was
right. Every game or every franchise has it suggests like a form for the video. Zelda suggested like, here's the weirdo fan timeline first, and then this official Nintendo one. But like you said, yeah, Dark Souls. If you do like a Souls timeline, for instance, it would be completely different, right? It would kind of touch on how those games communicate story. Whereas if you do one for Metroid, it would be, you know, yet again a different way. Yeah,
do we include the comics, or do we include like the semi-official stuff?
Right.
Like, you know, like Zelda, like at least Zelda only has games, and yeah, they in the 90s or 80s they made some random comics.
You gotta include that shit, and you also have to include
the CDI games.
The CDI games, and also like the information that was in the back of the Nintendo cereal box, the Nintendo breakfast system.
Yeah.
That shit's canon too, bro.
The decision for that is it was just easy. I mean, Nintendo put out an official timeline. We only covered the games that they covered in there. So the Nintendo considers those games as the canon games. Like, we just stuck like that to that, basically. We could, yeah, whatever. There are comics, there are manga, there are other.
What about Smash
games.
Brothers? You know, we didn't explore
how did
that
Link
at all.
get to all those characters?
And you know
what about that knockoff Link
timeline,
action
Smash
figure that they
Brothers
bought you in Puerto Rico, Marco? That had some lore in the back.
Hey, it's made of wood.
Yeah, that deciding what is relevant to what we're going to talk about versus, you know, is this just like extraneous information that like isn't relevant? I mean, yeah, I agree with you guys that each series we're going forward, we're probably going to identify like what is the hook here, like what is the thing that's going to like set the pace for the rest of this video, and like go from there. And that was kind of like even though we kind of knew what we were doing with this one, it was still kind of like the challenge was like kind of like trimming it down to what it really was. Like, I think it was trying to do too many things at once at the beginning. This all started like the Hyrule Story came out like December of last year. It's been like over a year now since they released this thing. And I remember when it came out, like I proposed like, hey, like let's strike while the iron's hot. Let's just do like, can we do like at that time it was like, I was envisioning like a 10, 15-minute video just like showed how like the official timeline, no evolution stuff or anything like that. It was like, here's Hyrule Historia, here's the graphic, and we just like explained how like it was basically just like taking the book information and putting it into a video form for that official timeline part. So remember the last part of the video? It would just be that part only, basically.
Yeah, but my favorite part of the video was the first part, like, because I remember those stories, those games coming out, and you know, every time like a new game would come up, like, you know, over, you know, the 90s and 2000s, like, you know, and you play the music and it's like, oh wow, it brings you back. And I guess that's kind of the retrospective part of that time.
Definitely.
Yeah, and then showing the second half. Not saying that every timeline should be like that, and the reason we did it with Zelda is because, you know, timeline evolved over, you know, the last 20 years. So you chose doing it that way. But you know, I think that's my favorite part. That's what I want to say.
Yeah, and that part didn't even come around until I think it was we were told no, we were like too busy at the time, I guess, to do anything. And then the subject came up a few months later, and that's when I was like, hey, like let's rework it as a different angle. Like it's been a few months, so it's not exactly, a lot of people have already like covered the official timeline in articles and stuff. Like can we do something a little bit more ambitious? Like can we just do like, you know, the evolution part of it and then reveal what it was? And at that point I was like, all right, we're still really busy right now. This is like around in March, and the general consensus, the decision was like, let's wait till summer. Like we'll do this in the summer is when things slow down. Let's start this in the summer. And I remember around like sometime between then and before E3, I submitted the original version of the like script, and then like for whatever reason, it was probably like such a lore dump that I think it was just opened and it was looked at. I was like, Jesus Christ, what is this, Michael? It's a monster, a beast, and it wasn't revisited until I think around like end of July, August.
Yeah, I got the script on my desk like the first week of September?
It was sometime, yeah, it was sometime in August that it was revisited a third time. It's like, all right, let's do this. Like August, September aren't looking too busy. I finally like pushed for it a little bit harder. We got the script back, and that's when we announced. I think we officially announced it at PAX. We had the teaser trailer.
Was that a mistake?
Yeah, it probably was.
But I think we did release fall.
We said fall, so we didn't really do it. I think it was the part where someone told me, is like, all right, we're shooting for September, and I was like, okay. So we said September at some point, and then we didn't hit it, and we're like, all right, we're trying for October, and then we didn't hit that. And like, all right, then it was a week-by-week thing in November, and the joke, at least for me, it was amusing because historically, this is what Nintendo has done with Zelda. They announce dates and then last minute delay it. So while that was never the intent to do that, it was kind of mimicking that. I was like, it's poetic justice right here. It's like
anything worth doing on GT is worth doing late. I've always said that.
Yeah, and like to be fair, like I honestly did not like. I wanted to see it get done like as soon as possible, but also like I also realized that like this needs to be good. So I want to take as much time, but ultimately I think it was just, we were just taking people were noticing how long we were working on this. I mean, I think everything you see here at GT, like aside from this, like retrospectives are probably the most intensive thing production-wise that we generally do here. And you've got those down so well that they come out on a good scheduled basis. I think when this was like not fitting into any kind of schedule, this is a little bit more ambiguous with its development. I think that's when people are like, all right, we have some expectations for this to be done. And to be a little bit fair, like once you're actually given a deadline, it kind of like pushes you to like, okay, it's time to kick this into gear. And that did help a little bit, but it was, I would say like in general, it's a kind of like a learning process. Like,
yeah, we were experimenting.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff.
Quite a bit of time.
There's a lot of stuff
which helped in the end.
Exactly, and like going forward,
we know what we're doing next time.
It seemed, you were working a lot on graphics, but it also seemed like a lot of your job during this period was to build shit in Minecraft. Like, how did that factor into?
Yeah, I need to build. I built the whole temple in Minecraft first, and then brought it over Maya.
Is that right?
That's not true. But yeah, like I think with future timelines, you know, sometime next year, like it's gonna be more streamlined. I mean, we've already had meetings about this, you know, and we already know what we're doing next. In some
What's
fashion.
next? Can you announce it now?
I don't know if we're gonna announce anything.
Haven't
This
you already?
just hit me, but like,
Dark Souls. No, wait.
we had the script done in August, and it came out like basically it was like 3
months,
maybe
yeah.
3.5 months at
Season.
most, and that was for like supposedly the most complicated, convoluted one we're gonna do, like the most ambitious
Yeah, that's a good point.
one. So if it took that long, and that was like roughly a quarter, not promising we're doing 4 a year or anything like that, but like we
Promise it, Mike.
we
Promise.
definitely can do like one in a much quicker turnaround than that.
It depends. I don't
I
think
still-
timelines should be half-hour videos or even that. Like, you know, you could tell a quick, compelling story. You know, like there's games that are only like 3 games long. You know, and you know, you could make a 20-minute video about that and make it fancy and all that. It doesn't have to be like a crazy
I mean,
lore dump.
I think the strength of it's always going to be like, what is the story we're telling in these? And thankfully, we do have enough series that have intriguing enough plot lines or overarching chronologies that people find confusing and or they want to just like see told out. Like part of the other side of the coin of this is like, yeah, we're trying to like solve a puzzle for people so they understand it. But I think a lot of people just want to kind of like, it's embellishing. I think like people want to relive these moments and like retrospectives have done such a good job of that on the whole and stuff. And we're always to have these are trying to be like the story part. Like these essentially, in all fairness to Brandon, these are like basically what he had been doing the last part of the retrospectives. We're just given a little bit more freedom to cover it more in depth. Like we can give it.
But there's a difference between doing, talking about relaying a timeline to someone and talking about the timeline.
Yeah.
So those end episodes of the retros never talked about the timeline. It was just like, here's just how it went.
Exactly.
It was never like, well, this went against controversy, and this, this thing we know about this history was announced at this particular time with this game, and it just kind of went straight through it. So that's why I think it deserves a separate show. And it also kind of takes the tension now, and I specifically did that with GTA. If you go back and watch the GTA retros, which all of you should, even if you watched it, you should just do it again.
Keep watching it.
I was really light on story. I kind of like introduced the characters and then that was it. Because like I think it makes sense to do a separate feature on that if we were to do something of the older GTA era. If we were to do that in a timeline and kind of talk about how all that stuff, Easter eggs that you can find in the different games that suggest things happen beforehand.
Speaking of retrospectives, isn't there a funny story about how Mike reacted to the Zelda retrospective back in the day? I think it might have been before he was hired.
There is a story in that.
Tell it, please. Do it.
So like that came out like
Brandon wants to hear this.
It was right before Twilight Princess came out.
Yeah, it was
so
05. That was
sometime around.
before Twilight.
This was the Mike wearing diapers, like raging at AOL, looking at.
Why the game trailer's timeline
This
is
was
wrong.
probably during the like worst phase of like my life in terms of maturity and handling this types of stuff. So
whoa, that's awesome.
yeah. So
I never heard it phrased that way. That's perfect.
So I think I remember seeing it. I don't know how I saw it first. I just remember every one of the other Zelda fan sites at the time were covering this video, and while they were all like praising like how well it was put together, like inevitably like every single person at a time in theory was like, gee, like Jesus Christ, like why did they do this? Why did they do this? Like, but to be fair, like there was no official timeline then, like it hadn't been revealed, so you had to like do the best. And like truth be told, except for a few things, some things were pretty correct and ended up being kind of correct. But at the time, with the information people had to go on, people like got way too worked over it. And then like my thing was, I was watching, I was like, in my head, I'm like, I know more of these people. Like, I gotta prove
that was
prove
like cat piss man
Here's-
Mike, like
here's-
going ape shit.
Here's my Asperger's kicking in right now, folks. Like, and it was like, what is the point? The one point I was just like, sat back. It was when you put the Oracle games in 2 different timelines, which to be fair, like, that's a pretty creative solution, honestly. Like, like that type of thinking would have been like awesome to have, like in retrospect, if everyone was a little bit more mature about it. But in that mindset of mine back then, like we were like, what the hell? 2 games you'd like to get connected together. What? How you do that? It don't make any sense. What the hell? God damn it! Like, yeah, that was like generally like people like, Jesus Christ, GT didn't put the 2 Oracle games in the same timeline. Like, don't discredit immediately. It's not serious enough.
And then put a disclaimer for you.
I know. And everyone's like, oh, is it a disclaimer or whatever? I didn't see a disclaimer. I see what I want to see.
And the way we worded it specifically is not just say like this could be wrong. It was like this is just us you know, being inspired from what we just did, because like it's interesting to get in the mindset of like playing all those games all at the same time. It like does something interesting to your brain because it's not intended to do that. Like those things, it's weird because like all the Zelda games are part of the same franchise, and yet they're not meant to be consumed all at the same time because of the different, you know, stories and different languages and like different eras. I mean, it's like 30, you know, plus years these games like representing. And so yeah, our take on it was just like, hey, this is just stuff that we noticed and just kind of spitballed after working on the project. And we know, I think we definitely had like, you know, smirks going back and forth between each other, being like, this is probably so off. But it just seems to make sense to us.
It's like
The way that that community reacted to Brandon's timeline, is that how you guys treat newcomers who have like, hey man, I thought of this cool thing, what do you think? It's like raining down hellfire.
I just prefacing this again, like there were some people, and like even me, like then like that was like an asshole mentality to have and stuff. Like that's the type of people, like when you're younger and stuff, some people are like that. Like you grow out of that hopefully eventually, and like to an extent I like have, and like I eventually got to a point where like I viewed things a lot differently than I did then. But yeah, back then it was probably like not the best time to like show like any kind of theory like that. This is some other people, but like. Did
you write any angry letters?
I didn't write any like letters. I'm pretty sure I made a post at some point. This broke down like what I was like. This is definitely wrong. This is definitely wrong. Just like what people would generally do to any kind of like thing. But like, let me just say this: like looking back upon it now, that it didn't dawn upon me now. What that video actually did, the complete credit to it is like that was one of the first video form versions of someone presenting a timeline theory, because that was like just less than a year removed from YouTube even existing, I think. So there wasn't a good avenue for people to even make videos. It was usually like rehosting yourself and your bandwidth got killed. Even like, you remember downloading QuickTime movies from IGN and stuff, like it was the era of that, and like GT like had that advantage of video content. And I think that was the time when you guys, at least to me, I started to realize you guys made other stuff besides just putting out trailers. In retrospect, I think that video kind of like accelerated like and more popularized amongst the general like gaming base. Like it became more mainstream, I think, at that point. Like you'd see other like outlets like picking up in Zelda Timeline stuff and like, or any memes around it and stuff. Like it became kind of like a cool thing to do. And like I think without looking too much in depth back at it, I think just what I remember, like that video is a large reason for that stuff actually like coming to where it is today, I think. So no other group of people, like while we were busy in our like caves and stuff in the message boards, drawing on the walls and writing and stuff.
With feces.
and you know, in the annals of the internet or whatever, in obscurity, this huge ass website took it upon themselves to make a video like this. And like that is more the place that I come from making this timeline. It was not, this was never made out of like spite or anything like that. Like,
oh, of course. I mean, nobody suggested that.
No, even like, but I'm admitting like back then, like it was like, oh, like I want to like, I think probably back then there was some part of me is like, one day if I have the resources, like let's get some guys together, let's make the ultimate like timeline theory video. But like, as I moved away from that and stuff, it's like, look what this retrospective part did. Look what our other retrospective parts had done for this. It's like it's been several years. A lot of people have been asking, like, can we please, like, guys, can you at least revisit the episode? And I mean, it's been kind of like difficult to get newer retros made now. And so with that prospect of going back and revisiting that, I think presenting it as a new type of feature was like probably the best chance of that happening. And that's where I was coming from with trying to do that. It was like, the only way we're going to do this is if we present it as something new and we're bringing something drastically new to this that's like relevant. It's like, hey, yeah, we can give you another theory or the official thing, but like let's also tackle like why this thing got so screwed up. Because I've more and more I'm drawn to the reasoning behind like why do people care so much about it? Why is it so screwed up? Like that to me is the real mystery. Like we all like joke and stuff like, yeah, like Kokotaki-san was like, you know, writing like ancient languages and stuff, and he came out and was like believed to be like, you know, the 10 Commandments and crap. But the truth is like it's not known. It may never be known. Like, but like that's the real mystery I care about. And that's more like developer insight and stuff. Like I don't care anymore what the timeline is. It was cool to see it, and like it was fun for like a week to dissect it. I was like, all right, this is like the same old shit again. Like we're just going back in circles. Like I don't want to do this anymore. I have no interest in it. It's like, I want to know, like, I want to get more insight into what these guys were thinking, like, what went down, like, what was the real story that happened here, like, finding out that, like, back then, titles were a formality, like, the so-called writer, like, he was helping programming, helping design shit, helping drawing, like, they all were doing that, like, getting that
But you see that more and more now.
I want to, like, that's the stories that need to be get out, like, and anytime, like, they do, like, those keynotes at, like, GDC, like, there was one year where, like, Miyamoto actually took the time to explain a little backstory on the making of Zelda 1. And he released those design documents, like, graph paper, like, making all the dungeons and stuff. Yeah. That was, like, and, like, the origin, like, he actually, like, revealed, like, Ganon was based on the enslaved story, the Chinese myth or whatever, or Journey to the West, and like Ganon was based on the main villain from that or something. Like giving that type of insight, like no one knew that. Like holy crap, that's kind of cool. Like I want to know that information. Like, and not just about Zelda, but like in games in general. That's like what I gravitate more is like the story behind stuff.
Yeah, it'd be cool if all of the people who made all of these games that we all grew up playing were more accessible. I mean, part of it is the fact that we live in different countries. Yeah. But those companies, Japanese companies, don't tend to put their developers at the forefront as much as
When we did the Castlevania retro, I couldn't find out who made the game. Anyone. I couldn't find a single person on the staff.
Yeah.
Because they made like the jokey credits, but they never actually made credits, and they didn't release them with the packaging for the game. There was no internet at the time. It was no publicated in any book or magazine.
I'm sure if you live there and you know people there, you could get access to folks, but it just as journalists working in the U.S., it seems like that world is kind of closed off to us, or it's really difficult to get to.
Exactly. And
should we be wrapping it up, Chris?
Oh no, I mean it is an hour and 16 right now.
Okay, that's kind of crazy.
Yeah, that's kind of.
But I was just coming in to make sure that it hasn't here. Make sure this gets edited out. But yeah, like I was just making sure that it hasn't dumped over to another card yet. It still has 36 minutes on the first set of cards.
Okay.
So it hasn't transferred over. But yeah, I mean it is kind of long.
Okay.
We gotta get rolling.
All right, let's wrap this up. So future timelines.
What are you gonna do?
So I guess one of the questions left is people have been like speculating what we're going to do next.
Can we announce it now? Like the F-Zero timeline?
The F-Zero timeline?
The Mike Tyson's Punch-Out timeline?
Let's just say this.
Baseball stars.
The little tease at the end, that was like, what, 2 a.m., like one of the last nights that we were working on this video. Marco and I was like, hey, Marco, let's just troll everybody. Like,
what's the most trollful song?
And I was like, Dearly Beloved. Like, let's just put it there. And then like Marco's like, find a piano version. It'll be even more subtle and stuff. And like, I think we spent way too much time on that, and we just put in this like Easter egg at the end, and then like.
And that is for people who don't know what the fuck Dearly Beloved is. What is that?
Well, we're like choking like the closed captioning right now. It doesn't even say anything there. We think we need to go back and say like Kingdom Hearts music playing right now. I mean, listen. Like,
but then I went to the Wikipedia of Kingdom Hearts and looked at all the other games I didn't know about, and I was like, oh my god. What have we gotten ourselves into?
We will narrow it down for you. It's either going to be Kingdom Hearts or it's either going to be Metal Gear. That are the two those two are the inevitable two we always came up with after like Zelda as the biggest ones we want to do. And I
want to do Dark Souls, man.
I have a question for you, Mike.
I want to do Assassin's Creed. That's just me.
Legacy of Kain.
Where does Link's crossbow training fit in the timeline?
Twilight Princess.
Really? You have an answer for that. I shouldn't be surprised, man.
He's a lore slinger.
Yeah.
My two favorite franchises to do something like this on would have been Legacy of Kain and Dark Souls, I think.
I'd like to see Gran Turismo.
Sure.
Frankly.
Why do you have to troll, man?
I want to see Madden.
I'm serious.
The Madden. I mean, there's a number at the end of every game.
Madden's commentary here. He said on this date that this happened.
Dude,
so
you could fucking do it, man.
Madden 10 caused a split in the Madden timeline.
Where does Joe Montana football fit into the Madden timeline?
Tecmo Super Bowl is like the beginning.
All right, I think this means we're done.
I think I want to close say that I think this was therapeutic for Mike. Just to look back and just see everything, like just let it out.
Right, yeah.
Not just this podcast, but doing the timeline video.
Prior to this happening, Mike was like, I felt like he was starting to become more feral or something. Like,
look at Beast.
His teeth were growing. You know what I mean?
He was becoming from Ganondorf to the pig Ganon.
Yeah. But you know, this allowed him. This brought him at least another 2 years of humanity. So we got to be thankful for that.
I think the 18th audio pickup I did was therapeutic for me. I think that was nice.
Yeah.
Like a
You
skyscraper was
did.
lifted off my shoulders. That was a deep one. Yeah, just go back and watch that timeline, and then imagine saying that whole thing, and then imagine doing that 3 times. It was
3
fun.
times.
At least the whole thing, and then there were like
There were, like,
a
5
line here
different
and there and a
revisions.
word here and there.
Yeah,
But-
you did like 5 revisions.
Oh yeah, it's good times.
And every time Damiani came to your desk and like knocked on your door, I know you had to
But
roll
even,
your
I mean,
eyes.
that's a good example. Sorry to drag this on, but like, I mean, everything was different from what we normally do with videos. Like, I even changed like the pace of how I read. Like, we definitely, tried to slow that down. So
Yeah. It's
it
like,
was,
Brandon, it's pronounced Hanj, not Hanj.
Oh God. I wonder if Miguel should just quickly say what the hell that
Nah, man, this is a mystery.
That's a mystery.
Sorry.
That's a
We out
mystery.
later.
It's like the Zelda
The
timeline.
GT timeline, the final timeline we'll do someday.
well, we'll be back next after the next one,
Oh,
whatever
God.
that ends up being.
Yeah. Well,
Well, I would say probably look to sometime in January. We'll probably make an announcement about what the next one will be. We're gonna like sit down and figure out a kind of a schedule going forward for how many think we're gonna be able to do next year and what exactly they're gonna be. But those 2 I mentioned, I think are probably the safe bets for the next candidate. I think we'll just go from there. But at the very least, think we're gonna try and do much more of these, and hopefully they come out much.
they're not gonna take us long.
No, take as long unless I don't want to hear anything about timeline until next like January. I just
Yeah, and the
cannot even think about working on the next one yet.
When we announced these things, like when we announced Zelda, we barely had started working on it. So always bear in mind that when we put out a trailer or a teaser, like sometimes like we just start working on that, and we just are so excited about it that we want to show it to people.
It's kind of like Square Enix.
Yeah, it's kind of like Final Fantasy Versus 13, but yeah, like, and we show so it's not like we're almost done with it and we're gonna tease it, and we're just starting to do it. So have patience, and hopefully it'll live up to your expectations.
All right. Well, I think that'll about wrap it up for all of us here. So I think thanks to listening to our mindless rambling here. And if you haven't checked out Timeline and for some reason you're listening to this first, be sure to actually check it out. Check out the Zelda retrospective too.
Yeah,
So
Blast from the
now you can totally get the full perspective on all this, and then watch Timeline. And one thing, we did do closed captioning for the video, so there's English subtitles now for those who are hearing impaired, and we are working on trying to get additional language support. Can't promise that, but we are looking into it. Earliest maybe next January, but we'd like everyone to be able to enjoy this, and we know not everyone speaks English, so, and especially the Zelda fan base, very diverse bunch of people there, so we want everyone to enjoy it. So look for that. For those who watch it, thanks for listening into this, and hopefully we'll have more for you soon.